So I'm going to call the school committee meeting back to order. We have our second candidate for superintendency, Michael Baldassarre. Did I say it right?
That's me.
Please correct me.
It's okay. That's me. It's Baldassarre, but it
Baldassarre.
depends on if you're
I apologize.
from. Depends on where you're from. Yeah.
And here we are. So, first question is why are you seeking the superintendency in our district, and what about your skill set and the needs of our district do you think come together for a good match?
Okay. The first part of the question is why am I seeking the superintendency? Let me answer that first in general. I began working with children with disabilities in 1991, so this is actually my 30th year of being in an educational position, and over the last 30 years I have prepared myself as well as I possibly could, and perhaps even unexpectedly, never thinking that I would be in the position where I could be in a place as large as Marlborough, and it's just a beautiful community like this to be considered for the position of superintendent. So I thank you for honoring me with your time and with this day that I've had in your community. My preparation led me to being a superintendent actually 10 years ago. And I think that from that time until now, the superintendency has been in my DNA. I've prepared myself in every way, shape, or form with regard to school finance, student wellness, curriculum, achievement, community engagement, family engagement, grants management, grant procurement, every other aspect of schooling that there is. I've come to a time in my life where it's time. I'm almost 50 years old, and I'm seeking the superintendency. My wife and I and my 4 children are gravitating this way in the state, and I applied for 2 superintendencies, as you're aware, by selection, selected Marlborough. As one of the districts, this district is very similar to, demographically, at least as far as student population goes, to the district in which I currently serve as the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. You have 5,000 students, we have 4,400. But prior to that, I was the Director of Special Education in Everett, Massachusetts, where we have 7,500 students in 3 square miles, one of the most densely populated cities in America. So I feel as though I am, more than adequately prepared for the position, not just academically and experientially, but personally. I also feel that Marlborough is a community in which I can do my best work. As I learned, I already knew when I came into the community today, most of the things that we talked about, and it just reaffirmed the student population that you have, the gift that you have of being financed as well as the district is, and the opportunities that exist here for the kids and for the community are a perfect fit for me. And my objective today was to show the community of Marlborough that I could be a fit for them and for the parents, the faculty, and staff. So I'm really comfortable being here with you tonight. I'm really comfortable answering your questions, because all I'm talking about is who I am. And I hope that the faculty and staff and families and that I met with today could see and know the real work that I do on behalf of the kids who need us most, and also the creativity that I have for the kids who are seeking more.
Dan. Yeah, good. Obviously, student learning is paramount to the success of a district, because that's why we're all doing this. Yeah. With that said, identifying learning targets, measuring student growth, determining responsibility for success, they're all under debate all the time. And could you share your thoughts with us on how a district should hold themselves accountable for those things, and in addition to any requirements the state may have? Yeah. And what we should do, what steps we might take when the benchmarks aren't met? Any example maybe have from your professional life, rather?
Well, first and foremost, I think that since No Child Left Behind and the influence that the federal government has had on the states, and the way funding has flowed, and the accountability measures that we've all faced are now, they are as commonplace in our lives as they could ever be. It's not that big of a deal anymore to, when they first came and we looked at standardized assessment and said, what are we going to do? What is this? How can they do this to us? With regard to curriculum and instruction and assessment and data cycles, those things happen everywhere. Here, they can happen, with greater frequency and with greater support because of the resources that the district has. And in any district, Marlborough, Everett, Woburn, Wellesley, doesn't matter where you are, those gaps are going to exist. Unfortunately, and most often, those gaps exist because of factors that not only take place in school, but some that take place outside of school. The zip code of kids, race and color, the finances that families have, single-parent homes, play a factor in how kids are coming into school. So going back to the 1960s and reaffirmed in the 1990s, we know that when kids come into school, starting at pre-K or kindergarten, or whenever they arrive, that there is a gap that exists based on socioeconomics, often, based on language that's spoken, often, based on factors that are outside, of the school's ability to influence things that happen at home. And all of the work that is being done in Marlborough that I learned about today, that I knew about before, is wonderful. When I was at the elementary school this morning, every single class was engaged. Every student was working project-based activities with their teachers, and you can see it happening. And now, come the end of the year, the school is going to be rated on how students perform on a standardized test that they're differentially prepared to to complete, and the factors that makes them differentially prepared are related to their wellness, are related to the availability of health care or dental care, the availability of behavioral health services. Most of my conversations today didn't focus on what's already happening in the schools. The principals know, the things that they're doing, and the faculty and staff are aligned, and what I really focused on today is the opportunity to close the gap during the time and the hours that school is not in session. So, we know from research that kids come into school and they learn at the same rate. And even though we apply, extra services and additional instruction for students, while they're receiving that additional instruction, still the other students are receiving instruction. So, learning is happening fast for everybody when the faucet of learning is on. But when the weekend comes, when the vacation comes, be it February or April or the summer, our higher income kids and our lower income kids actually separate slightly. And this happens 13 times over the course of their kindergarten to 12th grade, and the gap continues to get bigger. So all of the things that have been taking place in schools for the last 2 decades continue to take place, and we continue to make great investments in professional development, assessment materials, and in lower class sizes and in new school buildings, and yet the gaps are there. But the gaps can close when we offer our children and our young adults opportunities to be engaged with their peers and be engaged with meaningful adults after school, on weekends, during summer programs. And there are so many opportunities to do that, and there's outside funding available for that, that we can create new and extended learning opportunities for kids, not just in Marlborough, but across the state and across the country when you think about it. So I acknowledge that achievement gaps exist everywhere. I acknowledge that every community is doing their best to make changes in their instructional day to address those changes, but those gaps have existed since 1960, and it's 2022. So 62 years later, we're having the same conversation about the same gaps that have always been there. And there's so many ways to address them. The big consideration is addressing them by extending the opportunities for students to learn and engage. And I'm not just saying sports, and I'm not just saying mathematics and language arts. I'm saying any opportunity where the students are congregated, and it could be in your after-school program at the Boys and Girls Club, or any other place. Those are places where learning can happen, where behavioral health services can be delivered, where health and wellness consultation can take place with families. And that when we address the basic needs of our kids, they're going to be better learners. And when they're better learners, the gaps will close. That's my philosophy. Yep.
Tell us about your experience working with children and families who don't look like you, who don't speak your language, and don't have the economic advantages that you do. How have these experiences shaped your view of public education and its mission?
Well, I'd first like to point out that although I sit here and I'm white and I'm wearing a suit and tie, that I, as a child, did not have any economic advantage. I had economic disadvantage. I grew up in a city of Niagara Falls at 1717 Walnut Avenue, a Googleable address. And I mean, anybody who listens to this can just look and see, where I grew up. Busy street. And a lot of my, my classmates, they weren't white. And I went to, city schools. So I have my own experience. When I reach inside myself and I can pull out the me being a child, I understand what it's like to not have everything that everybody else has. That's just the way that is. My experience in work, when it comes to our kids that don't speak English or our students who have different color skin, I would like to first point out that all of our kids have needs, and those needs are not always defined by the shape of an eye or the color of a skin or the language that our kids speak. That we have kids from single-parent homes, we have kids from low-income families who are starving and who are suffering and need our attention as well. So when I think about equity, I don't just think about equity from the standpoint of the diversity of race and language. I also think of equity from the standpoint of kids who have great needs. And any one of us in this room or anybody who's listening to this conversation, at some point in their lives, they've had needs. They've had times of stress and times of crisis where I can only hope that somebody was there to provide them with some degree of support. So prior to answering that question, I just want to point out that equity is a matter that should be addressed for all students. When it comes to the specifics of language and color, we in Woburn, we've been working on a plan for family engagement. It's a strategic plan for family engagement that we're working on being a really welcoming community. And we have 3 pillars that we've established in consultation with a group that's called School in Maine via a grant that we have from the Department of Education. And we're looking at two-way communication with families, dual capacity building, relationships between the school and outside agencies, the school and city departments that can help our families, the school and ecumenical leaders, not to merge church and state, but to think that we have families that go first to their pastors and first to their reverends and first to their church leaders before they go to a doctor, before they go to a counselor, before they come to us. And so we have so many power brokers in the community who can help us communicate. And the third part of the plan is thoughtful transitions. Having kids who are brought in, come into schools, our schools from other countries. We've had the experience of having kids come in from, I've told the story, several times today of a girl who came in from Guatemala. And when she came into the Woburn Public Schools, she was going into 4th grade. But she'd never been to a public school in her life. And so after all the registration was filled out and the check to make sure she had her vaccines and her physicals and all the things that had to be done, you know, she was taken over to the Goodyear Elementary School, and she walks into a place that she's never seen before, with lots of kids that look different than her, in a place to sit that she's never probably seen, in a gym, in a cafeteria, and you know, this space, a library, just things that were so strange to her. And for a lot of the kids that come from other countries, the transition from that country comes through, you know, a border. We've had kids who are detained a couple of months in ICE camps, and then they come to school, right? And we spend very little time transitioning our families into the community and into schools. And I can't imagine what that feels like, to walk into a place that you've never been and people speaking a language that you cannot speak. So we're focusing on meaningful transitions for our kids. I've told this story as well today, that if I take one of my kids to Petco to get a fish, they put the fish in the bag. I bring the fish home, I put the fish on top of the tank. The fish floats on top of the tank, and once the water temperatures are the same, I let the fish go into the tank. And we take great care in transferring a goldfish from Petco to the tank at home. And that we need to take great care when we transfer kids from other countries into our schools. Because sometimes I think we pay better attention to the goldfish than we do to the kids and our families. So I have great experience, particularly in Everett, where 7,500 of our kids, you know, half of them, you know, don't speak English, and 85% of them are low income. And it's, you know, probably one of the most diverse districts in the state. When I think about ways to welcome our families and our students into our schools, I do believe that there's a way to do it in which we involve our families in the decision-making process for what we are going to do. And if you have a council of people within the schools who, you know, meet regularly with groups of people in the community, be it parents, community members, or staff members, who speak different languages or different colors, maybe LGBTQ, we can ask them, what do you think of what we're doing in our schools to welcome you and provide you with the highest quality education that connects you to your peers and to the staff in the schools? And we can hear from them in two-way communication, one of those pillars of family engagement. And we can take their ideas and their thoughts and we can implement them in our schools. We need not a consultant. We don't need some one person to usher us through a planning process when we can just talk to our own people, our own families, our own kids, our own staff, about how we welcome students of color, how we welcome LGBTQ youth, how we welcome students that don't speak English, how we make education more accessible to our kids that don't have the financial resources at home. This is a big deal, especially here in Marlborough, where 60% of the students are low income. It's a big, big deal. That engagement factor, that connection factor, is where the good change is. But we can't decide it without hearing from them and having them tell us what are the challenges they face and responding to what they tell us, and that being the data source, not the data source being a white guy from Niagara Falls, New York, telling you about what it's like to be low income in 1980. Because it's now 2022 and our families are here and they need us now.
So just as a sort of a follow-up into that, and you talked about engagement with those families. So a couple of things about that. I don't know how it is in other communities, but often when we do get engagement or other participation from families, it's a small percentage of the whole district. Yeah. So therefore, not that their opinions would be discounted, but it's not necessarily representative of the entire district. So how would you go about trying to increase that.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of.
It's interesting that you say that. So in Woburn, we have an LPAC, English Learner Parent Advisory Council. And, you know, the first meeting that we had of the LPAC maybe had 8 or 9 parents. And what we've been trying to do, yeah, well, but what we, you know, and that's of 450 kids that don't speak English in Woburn. And certainly, you know, double the number of students that Marlborough has that don't speak English in Everett. So there are ways to do that. And one of the things I'd like to point out about being a superintendent is that I don't feel as though like I'm wearing a cape and that I have the answer to every single question. But I do have the ability to collaborate, and I do have the ability to seek, you know, the guidance of the community on the community's ideas, but also my own. I'm not a command and control leader. I believe I'm an inspire and trust leader. I don't do a lot of the directing and the structuring every single day. Those are reserved for safety issues. What you're talking about is the relationship building. It's the active listening piece, and actively listening to our families and asking them individually, how do we get you more engaged, is the real question. I can't do that with a Google survey. I have to do that through meaningful two-way communication, which is one of the pillars of our plan in Woburn that we spoke about. And the plan in Marlborough could be very, very different. So what we did with the LPAC is we're seeking parent leaders that will be the brokers to reach out to the other parents. And we're putting together meaningful programs for our parents when they come, where we don't want to talk to them about what we want to talk about. We want to talk to them about what they want to talk about. And we had the good fortune of having, at our last LPAC, we had the ambassador to the consulate of Brazil from Boston, who oversees immigration for all of the Brazilians in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. There's 400,000 Brazilians coming in to these states, or that are in these states. 360,000 of them live in Massachusetts. So we welcomed him into our community to talk to the parents. How many parents showed? 60. From 8 or 9 to 60. We offered childcare. We had pizzas at every table. There were so many Portuguese-speaking families that the whole presentation took place in Portuguese and it was translated into English, which is the reverse. So I and some of my colleagues got to experience what it's like to have somebody sitting in front of you speaking a language that you don't understand, right? And it was real. And for us, it was a learning and growth experience for us. And that's just one example. But the reality is that the way to engage those families is through two-way face-to-face conversation. And the question that we need to ask them legitimately is, how do we engage you? How do we get you to be part of our community with us? And not have this conversation of how do we get them to come here? Because they are us. And they have to feel that. And we have to create that. And how that happens isn't the decision of one person sitting at a table. How that happens is the decision or the ideologies of many people who talk about how we can do this. Before you can build a really good structure, you have to have a really good blueprint or a really good plan. And so, yes, I can answer that question myself in Woburn because we did it. But to answer it here in Marlborough, we need a creative and collaborative and a trusting process that helps us build trust with community members who might not trust us, which is why they might not come. And I believe that I would be a great candidate to make that type of communication possible as part of a team of many who are interested in doing so.
All right. What are your strategies for fostering a positive relationship with the school committee regarding making an educational policy for the district, setting budget priorities and formal spending plans, engaging in collective bargaining, and creating a solid administrative and policy-making team that supports the district's goals and objectives.
Okay. So that was many questions. So the
Four parts.
Yeah, okay. So the first part is, how do I work with the school committee on policy development? Is that what I heard?
Yep, policy,
Yeah.
essentially policy, budget, collective bargaining, and administrative policy.
Okay. The first thing, you know, on policy is I've had a lot of policy experiences over the last couple of years. And one of the things that, and it struck me today in a conversation with one of the Marlborough parents, is that sometimes policies kind of take place at a school committee meeting, and the only kind of notification that there's going to be policy discussion is what's on the school committee agenda, and you hope that people saw it, right? So when policies are going to be discussed that are going to involve a great many in the community, you know, I think that it's imperative that, you know, the folks who have kids in the schools, the folks who vote, you know, have the opportunity to know that those discussions are taking place, and that they have an opportunity to discuss their concerns about said policies before, you know, they're enacted, and, you know, and people might not agree with them. You know, the policy is the constitution by which we live in the district, and I don't think that it's something that should be taken lightly. So how do I work with the committee on that? Well, the policy is the committee's policy. And you know, I assume that the committee would ask me for my opinion on said policy. But ultimately, it's the committee that votes the policy. I would see myself as being the person who goes out and researches all policies available that are on a topic. I would see myself as the person that goes out and gets legal opinions on policy decisions, so that the committee has as much information as it can, so that it can deliberate in the best interest of the kids and the faculty and the community, you know, on the policies. I would see myself as the information provider, and then when the committee turned to me and asked for my recommendation, I would be prepared to give that, and I would explain why I think my recommendation is in the best interest of the children and of the staff in the Marlborough Public Schools. Second was collective bargaining.
Sure.
Okay, that's one of them. My experience in collective bargaining is vast, particularly when I was at Mahar and I was the superintendent of 3 districts at the same time. So in each district, I had a number of unions, whether it was, you know, the teachers union, the paras. In one district, the nurses had their own union, the custodial. So at any given time, I had, you know, 15 different unions. And so I've had a tremendous experience in collective bargaining over the last 15 years. And I enjoy the process because I do see it as an opportunity to partner with our unions and talk about what's in the best interest of our kids and in our community. The superintendent tends to stand, you know, kind of on a tightrope in between because the faculty and staff in all positions are those who I stand up for. The children who are receiving the education are those who I stand up for. The taxpayers in this community are those who I stand up for. So standing in the middle of all of these parties is something that I've done, you know, many times. I think of myself as a skilled negotiator. The best of late was the return to school from COVID negotiations that took place. I had the good fortune of being allowed to take a leading role in that process, and I know that the union president in Woburn, Miss Locke, would speak, you know, well on my behalf as a result of our work in those negotiations, as would, you know, any of the other union presidents with whom I've negotiated. 2 more?
Yes.
Budget priorities.
Yep, setting budget priorities.
The budget priority piece is, you know, it's a little bit easier because the budget's connected directly to the strategic plan. And I am going back to those Mahar days. I was doing 3 budgets a year, 2 municipal and 1 regional school budget. And I felt as though it was a strength of mine to allocate the taxpayers' dollars as wisely as could possibly be done. And, you know, I know that some people, or some leaders put together budgets that are pie in the sky that can never be achieved. Tell me everything that you want, and then we'll just cut from there. But yet, you know, in cities, in towns, you know, 2%, 3%, 4% is a realistic number. I think that being realistic and honest with community members about the availability of funds is really important, so that we're not, you know, giving people false hopes and letting them down as the process goes. As far as setting priorities, again, I'm a facilitator, I'm not a director, and I would turn to the committee and I would say, you know, these are the proposed priorities, but I would look for the committee's guidance, and you know, I believe that that's a collaborative process that we engage in together. And I missed one.
Well, two of them were the same.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, to follow up on the budget thing.
Yeah.
Not that it's happened here, and not that we expect to do, but what process or method would you use to prioritize budget expenditures for the remainder of a school or fiscal year if you suddenly were faced with a major or mid-year budget shortfall or unanticipated?
Yeah, so I would use a modified zero-based budgeting approach. And what that means is we start with the basic needs that must be, that you have no choice. Everything starts at zero and you build up from there. So staffing, you know, the transportation, and you know, the reality is that you're asking me a question, you're asking me to do something that I have unfortunately had to do many times before. As the superintendent of Orange Elementary Schools, we were provided with 95% of net school spending annually. So I would have to choose between having lighting in certain areas or not. And by taking out certain lights in the building, I could lower our kilowatt hour usage, lower our electricity bill, and hopefully find enough money to hire another staff person. That's legitimately how difficult the budgeting process was there. The budget process was so transparent that I had to justify every expenditure to the town. And so every line item, the way that we built the budget, was every line item had a tab in a 3-ring binder. And I had these 3-ring binders across the desk. And so we had people in the finance committee in the town who would take a ruler and they would go from line to line. Why did this go up? Why did this go up? And sometimes they had questions and sometimes they didn't. And the one that sticks out in my mind, at least today, was there was a forest fire one year, and the lumber price at Aubuchon went up like 33 or 34%. And somebody asked, well, why are you buying so much more, you know, in the wood shop? And I was able to take out the book and flip to the page and say, we're actually buying exactly the same amount that we already had. It's just that there was a shortage of lumber and the price of lumber went up. So when times get tough, you know, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, I have tremendous experience in slim budgets. I think that I would be remiss if I didn't say that, you know, Marlborough has the gift of 150% of net school spending. And that makes you able to do almost anything that you prioritize with the you know, the quality staff that you have and the funding that you have to allocate towards the priorities that are most important. But you know, and I should just point out that in Everett, we were 100.1% of net school spending, and I had a $25 million special education budget. And over the course of the 3 years that I was in Everett, special education outplacements went down by over $1 million, and our in-school services went up. And that's, you can see that in your circuit breaker data recording, you know, data sheets that still exist online. Even there, when I didn't have to, I was able to increase services for kids and decrease what the expectation was of the taxpayer. Not even intentionally, it was just quality programming, and that's the way that it worked out.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So during the pandemic, the social and emotional needs of students was really come to the forefront. We knew that there were a lot of kids suffering prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic certainly exacerbated things for students that were already struggling and for students who weren't struggling. So can you talk to me about, the work that you've done around social emotional health for students and what you foresee needs being going forward? I doubt that the needs that we have in Marlborough are dramatically different from the needs that you have in your districts as well.
So first, I just want to point out that the social emotional aspect of education is not only a priority for me, but it's also an area of expertise. And you cannot underestimate the value of it. The social emotional programming, the excellent social emotional programming you have cannot be recorded or demonstrated on an MCAS. It's actually recorded and demonstrated by what doesn't happen, or how fast you can respond to some difficult things that do. In Everett and in Woburn, in both districts, I oversaw the implementation of therapeutic crisis intervention for schools. That's administered by the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research and the College of Human Ecology at Cornell University. It's a big deal program. It started in the 1980s in one residential facility in Ithaca, and it's now all over the world. There are 3,000 trainers worldwide and only 36 trainers who've established themselves as professionally registered trainers through Cornell. I'm one of the 36 people on the planet that has that certification, and I'm really proud of it. It's one of my personal biggest achievements. TCI doesn't really focus on the services that we give to students. TCI focuses on the responses that adults have to how students act in response to their feelings. So essentially, a student has a stressful situation or a trigger that brings a feeling, that brings a behavior. These three things you cannot control. You might not know what the trigger is. You don't know what the child feels, but there's a behavior. There's something that happens. The only thing that we control is what the adult does in response to that behavior. And by giving adults the opportunity to know many tools that can be in a toolbox in response to that behavior is what changes that cycle of crisis or conflict from going around and around and around and becoming something bigger. So that's a tier 1 response that everybody can be trained in. Too often, I've encountered people who have only one tool in the toolbox. And sometimes a pair of glasses needs to be fixed, but the only thing that they have is a hammer or a screwdriver that is far too big. So we want to give the adults the tools that they may not have to deal with those stressful situations with kids. The second component is tier 2. And what we have there is, in a lot of schools, counselors, behavioral health specialists, they move from place to place in response to situations, kind of like with a fire extinguisher. Something's happening here, I go over here to see what's going on. Okay, I'm going to deal with the situation, we're going to get it resolved, and then I got to go over here. And they keep going like this nonstop without ever actually finding out what the core issue is and providing the student with a certain level of treatment on that issue. So using a program that's called Match ADTC, a modular approach to therapy for anxiety, depression, trauma, and conduct disorders, students receive goals-based counseling that's identified in an individual diagnostic treatment plan for that student around that goal. And what we're doing is we're not dealing with sort of the crack in a wall, but we're dealing with the foundation that causes the crack in the wall. And so when you have this system of support, it's kind of like an RTI system for behavioral health in the schools. We have response and we have intervention that helps kids change their responses to stressful situations in the future. And then finally, at the very tip, we have psychiatric consultation that we do as the district. Right now, if you tried to find a psychiatrist for your son or daughter or for a student, independently, it may take you 4 or 5 months to get an appointment. And during that 4 or 5 months that the kids are waiting for an appointment, sometimes the issues kind of disappear, but sometimes they actually get worse. Well, the schools are in positions where they can have contractually psychiatrists who are on the ready, at times of high need. What does that do? Well, it provides parents with access to services that they might not be able to get, but it also allows the school to be so responsive that you actually stave off the need for more serious intervention via special education, out of district placement, or what have you. Finally, it can go on about this for, actually I got 2 more things. What we're doing now in Woburn is, because kids can't get access to therapeutic and behavioral health services during the day, we're providing them with services from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. after hours at the Boys Club and at the YMCA. So we received a grant so that we can pay our own adjustment counselors to extend their workday if they so choose. And they get paid $67 an hour to provide those services in the after-school programs for kids who are there. But if kids need those services and they're not there, the parents can bring them there for those services. I was also the architect of a preferred provider model in Everett that doubled the quantity of service that was available for our kids using funding from Mass Health and Medicaid, and having clinicians come into the school to provide services. And there's an article that was published in the National Association of Special Education Teachers on the topic. That's a little bit more elaborate, and it would take some time to explain, but we were able to get $1.5 million in service for about $530,000 a year. And it was funded partially by the district, but also by the federal government, is the way it worked.
Denise. All right, tell us about the experiences you have had with collective bargaining. What is the best role for the superintendent, and what do you view as the role of the school committee in collective bargaining?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, before, it's not just collective bargaining, but it's before collective bargaining. Like, collective bargaining is not the first time that you're establishing a relationship with your union leadership in any of the unions. So collective bargaining is, when it goes really well, it's a result of excellent relationships and what I would call, being empathetic to, the needs and the concerns of the people who are doing the work with students every single day. And when you have those good relationships to start, it's very easy to set ground rules and to abide by them and to have a really respectful experience. When it comes down to, the contract, and, you can take the contract, and every single year you can break it apart and, say, we want this and they want that, and, there's 50 or 60 proposals here and 20 proposals there. What it all comes down to, honestly, is chapter 1 of Getting to Yes, if anybody has ever read that. And that in a negotiation, nobody wins. One side is here and the other side is here. And through honest and trusting communication, you come together in the middle. And at the end of it, relationships are intact. And, maybe the union didn't get everything they wanted, and maybe the committee didn't get everything that the committee wanted. But in the end, it works out for our kids. I can't even be, maybe 20 different negotiations that I've been a part of. And never a bad experience. I'm really proud of that work, because I believe it really comes down to how you communicate with others, developing your common interests in advance and sticking to those, to those interests as you go through the, the bargaining sessions. I see the superintendent as the communicator who sits between the two. And, hopefully, with good communication and finesse makes it happen.
Dan.
I put this is kind of a two-part question, so I'll make sure. Okay, first of all, could you tell us professionally yourself how you've used the evaluation process to improve performance and motivate teachers or administrators? And the second thing is, as someone who probably supervises evaluators,
Yeah.
how do you ensure that they're being objective and fair and consistent in the way they evaluate their evaluatees, whatever that word is?
Yeah. Well, I think, I have to say first that, evaluation must take place for everybody. Me, everybody who works should have evaluation. They should have an opportunity for somebody to tell them they did a great job. They should have an opportunity for someone to say, these are your strengths, and these are areas in which you can be stronger. That's how you can have conversations around individual growth. So first and foremost, evaluations must take place. Second is I do not see the evaluation process as a gotcha process, as a way to weed people out. I see it as a way to help people improve and help people be better, including myself. I expect from those who supervise me an honest evaluation of my work, an appraisal of what I've done so that I have a record of it for my career. And the areas in which I can improve, I need to hear what those areas are from others so that I can actually put those things and make goals and put those into play, because nobody's perfect. Everybody, can improve. We have the fortune, in Massachusetts of having a really clearly established rubric for superintendent evaluation, for teacher evaluation, for administrator evaluation, and you can focus in on any area of that rubric that you want to be a goal for improvement for any staff member. And it can be a powerful tool for growth in a community. So how do I see myself using it? Not only do I see myself using it, but I see myself participating in it and being evaluated. And my evaluation, unlike everybody else, gets shared with the entire public. I have to be, open and receptive to constructive criticism in front of thousands of people. So from a leadership perspective, I don't expect for or from anybody who works in Marlborough anything that I wouldn't expect for or of myself. And, and that's it. We've all spent, many hours and many days as administrators preparing to conduct evaluations. And for those people who need mentorship in doing that, I'm prepared to provide that myself or provide others who can. Evaluation happens in multiple ways and through many different conversations. It's not just the end of year document, but all the steps in between.
Okay. This is a long one,
Okay.
so bear with me, but it's really only one question at the end. But
Okay.
so the scenario is a student has complained to the police that he was harassed in the locker room by members of his lacrosse team. The abuse included pushing, hazing, verbal taunting, and possibly actions with sexual overtones. The parents of the alleged victim want a criminal complaint issued and investigated. The alleged victim is under 18. The perpetrators may also be under 18. A local reporter gets wind of the story from a student source inside the school and has some names of involved persons. You've had a mixed relationship with this news source. The reporter contacts the superintendent with some of the following questions. Can you confirm that it was the lacrosse team? Where was the adult supervision? Has the school department issued appropriate mandated reports of the victims? We're told this has happened before, so what can you tell us? If you stonewall us, we'll report that as well, because we think some of the students are not eligible for protection as juvenile sources. What are some of the things you think about as a superintendent, and how do you respond?
It's interesting that you bring that up. It's a 4-step process in any incident like this. Priority 1 is the safety of our kids now. We know something happened. I need to make sure that the students that had been part of this or know about this are addressed in a meaningful way. okay? And this can be a traumatic experience for the victim. It could be a traumatic experience for someone who was there and didn't participate. It could be a traumatic experience for someone who saw it on the news or reads about it. And there has to be a protocol in place to address those needs and the safety of those kids. Like, that is the most important. The second step in the 4-step process is what supports do we provide. The kids who are alleged need a certain level of support. The victim needs a certain level of support. Their families need a certain level of support. The school in itself, the team, the athletic director, the principal, everybody who's involved in that needs a certain level of support. They need a leader to support them. And that is very, very important, is that, you know, as the superintendent sitting in central office, when something happens in one of the schools, the superintendent bears some responsibility for that. Because it's not just what happened in that moment, but it's all of the things that happened before that moment, and all of the training, and all of the expectations and the culture that was set from the superintendent's office all the way down, you know, for this thing to take place. So what level of support do my students need? Do my families need? Do my faculty need? Then the learn phase, what happened? And I can't respond to a reporter if I don't know what happened. And so sometimes we have to say to the reporters that we are learning about this situation now, and our first priority is our kids' safety, and our second priority is providing support to our principal, to our athletic director, to our coaches, to our guidance counselors, to our counselors, and to everybody who has to support these kids. It's a big, big deal. It's a big responsibility. And then the final part is the response. And, you know, having seen situations similar to this before, no response is a terrible response. Parents need to know that their kids are coming to a safe place. They need to know what we're doing now to make them safe. And we have to communicate that. After that incident, it's probably really important that we have two-way communication and forums to talk about what happened with our kids, with our staff, and with our parents. It's really, really important that we communicate and that we hear from them what their thoughts are, what their feelings are about such an incident, because we want to make sure it doesn't happen again. It happened and it can't undo the past, but what we can do is we can use it as an opportunity for growth, understanding, learning, and we can make our administrators and coaches better as a result. Now, if something happened in the aftermath and somebody is really responsible for it, accountability is, yes, it's a big, big deal. And communicating with the reporter is a big, big deal. But I'm more concerned about communicating directly with our staff and directly with our parents than I am with the reporter. And those communications that we have with our staff and with our parents, they get to the reporters too. Now, I would not let a reporter write something that's not true about a faculty or staff member or about a student. I can't give specific information about youth. And oftentimes these communications are vetted by counsel before they go out and they're in writing. But sometimes we have to actually stand up and we have to stand in front of people on a microphone and we have to answer questions. And we have to be able to do that authentically because that builds trust. I have to be able sometimes to have somebody look me right in the face and ask me a question and have me say, I can answer that and here's what I can tell you. Or say, I would love to answer that, but I can't right now. But what I can tell you is this. Your kids' safety, the well-being of our staff is intact because this is what we've done in response. That is a really stressful situation for a district to go through. The situation in which you describe actually would involve a Title IX investigation. And in the Title IX investigation, no discipline can be handed out until the investigation is over. Title IX protects both the victim and the alleged perpetrators. And that's a legal process that, you know, unfortunately I've had to oversee, and it's often, you know, guided by counsel, you know, in how you actually do that. I view that situation as it's stressful and it's terrible, but it's also a time for growth, and it's also a time for students and faculty and staff to know that they have a superintendent who supports them and is going to do everything in the aftermath to ensure their safety and that they're supported and that we have maybe even better plans in place, you know, in the future. You know, so many times over the last 20 years, I've seen things happen in schools that are really, really tough. something just like that. In Everett, we lost a student, you know, to a violent act. We lost a staff member to a violent act. Things happen, and we have to be able to not only respond to them and keep everybody safe, but we have to respond to them and let people know what is going on. I can't, as a father myself, sit at home and worry about what's going to happen to Julia when she goes to high school. I need that communication from our superintendent or from our principal, because I'll have questions. And if they're not answered, I'll go with questions. So when something like that happens, I don't just look at it from the standpoint of a leader, an administrator. I reach inside myself and I pull out the dad. And I think about it from the perspective of a dad. And I talk to my wife and I say, what about the perspective of you, Mom? Because those things are really, really important. And it goes back to that engagement. Two-way communication with our families is really, really important.
Great. That's pretty much all our questions.
Did I get through them all?
I think so.
Okay.
Is there anything more that you would like to tell us?
Well, there's a lot, you know, that 20 years of being in leadership, there's a lot. And there's no one thing that I didn't miss at some point during the day. I just want to, thank you. And I want to thank the committee members who I met earlier who couldn't be here tonight. And I'd like to thank the mayor. And I'd like to thank the superintendent. I had an hour coffee with him this morning, and then we got to have dinner together. And it was a wonderful experience. And it's clear to me that he is a trust and inspire leader. And he is, like I said, the last thing I said to him before he just dropped me off was, I said, you know, Mike, this is a great place, and you'd be a great superintendent to have. And so I compliment you on all of your work in the community that you've done to make the Marlborough the place it is. I have no questions. I have nothing more to add. I'm just grateful for our time together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thanks so much. Okay, so that wraps up our meeting for tonight, and I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.